Hello gamers, welcome back to Gamer Kiwi TV. I'm Grant and today we're going to be taking a look at Endzone, A World Apart. Now, Endzone is apparently based in the post-apocalypse after terrorists blew up some nuclear power plants across the planet. I'm not sure how long it's been since they actually did that, but I'm sort of assuming that it's been a little while. It was released on the 2nd of April 2020, although that's what I found online when I just sort of googled it. Steam actually says it was released on the 19th of March 2021, so I'm not sure if March is when it came out of early access, or I'm not too sure. I couldn't really find out, although there is still an early access screen in the game itself, so I'm thinking it might be that. It was developed by Gently Mad Studios and published by Assemble Entertainment. So my original plan was really just to play through the tutorial and then kind of get about an hour worth of gameplay after that, and then sort of do my analysis and have a chat about it and all that. So that was the original plan, but the tutorial took me 4 hours, 29 minutes and 30 seconds to complete. So I'm just going to talk about all of that instead, because I think pretty much the entire game I experienced within that tutorial. It was probably the longest tutorial I've ever played in my life. You usually expect sort of tutorials to take 15-20 minutes, something like that. This one took me 4 hours, 29 minutes and 30 seconds to complete. It was crazy. In saying that though, it must have done something to me to a positive effect if it kept me there for 4 hours, 29 minutes and 30 seconds. So, I mean, look, I enjoyed it. There are a couple of points, mainly early on, that I didn't really understand, and I'll bring them up as sort of time goes by, but yeah, this is really just from my point of view, from a first playthrough point of view, basically. So I all this footage, I'm talking right now from a point of view where I loaded it up, I hit the record button on my recording software and then played it, and I took some notes along the way. So I'm probably going to end up talking about some stuff that might get answered later on, maybe when you go down the research trees and you've researched a lot of stuff, it might explain a lot of things that I bring up. All of this analysis is based off the tutorial and my experiences from that. So let's just rip straight into it. So the first thing I did was I turned the bloody music down, because holy shit, far out. It was, I loaded it up, and the first thing that happened was this annoying tone in my headphones, and I was like, what the hell is this? So I went straight to the options menu, turned the music right down, probably back to about 20% or something, and after that I hadn't really noticed a thing. So it was just enough that the first thing I did when I loaded the game up was turn the music down. It's not very often I have to do that, so it wasn't a particularly good first impression, but I mean, other than that, the music was fine. The other thing that I sort of first noticed was the UI was slightly confusing from the start, especially sort of near the start when you're going to start assigning your builders and getting them to do jobs and things like that. But I found very, very quickly after that it gets quite user-friendly. So, when you have been playing for a couple of hours, you realise that they actually designed it quite well to be quite user-friendly. It's not like something like Crusader Kings or another game like that where you've got a screen that's got 5 million points of detail on it and you never really know what you're supposed to be looking at unless you're a veteran and you've been playing it for years and years and years. And I have put a lot of time into Crusader Kings, so I do sort of understand the UI, but I do remember going back to it when I first played it, and it was, confusing as all hell. My first impression of this was it was quite confusing, mainly because the game sort of picks and chooses how deep it wants to go into certain details of it, but I'll go into a bit of that a bit later on. One of the other things I noticed when I first loaded it up was pretty much our first job was to gather water. So you've got, I think I counted, there were 15 settlers all up, and there were 11 adults and 4 children. The settlers that you get right at the start of the game. And the first thing that we did was build a jetty to gather water. And it really confused me for a couple of reasons. One, why do we need to build a jetty just to gather water that we're then going to lug back to our little bus thing? Like, why couldn't we just go into the water with our containers and just pull it from there? That was the first thing. The second thing is, look, I have done a lot of hunting out in the bush, mainly with my uncle. My uncle was in the Air Force, so he spent a lot of time doing training and stuff in regards to survival and things like that. one of the first things that he taught me was, if you ever get yourself into any trouble, the things that you want to focus on in this order, if you get yourself into trouble and you're probably not going to find help anytime soon, is basically 4 things. Like, there's a big list of things you need to do, but the first 4 things you do is find shelter, find a heat source, find water, and then find food. In that order. You can't swap them around. That is the order of it. And it confused me that the first thing that we do when we get into the game, into a survival game, is the first thing we do is build a jetty to gather water. It really, really confused me, because what wasn't the first thing we were doing to gather resources, build a house, build shelter for these 15 settlers that we've got? But instead we're using all that material to go buy a jetty to gather water. It just really confused me, and it sort of annoyed me a little bit. And that wasn't a good first reaction. My impression does change, later on, because I do actually really, really enjoy this game. It did sort of save itself, but those few points in my initial reaction to the game was, don't really know about this, especially that one. I mean, this is a survival game. It's about people being in a situation that they don't want to be in, and they have to survive. And the first thing that we do is build a jetty to gather water, and the bus doesn't count, because that bus isn't going to fit 15 people in there. It just isn't. But anyway, moving right on. There are a few things that I initially noticed when I first started playing, was the effects. So when I loaded it up, it was raining, and I noticed that unlike in most other games, it wasn't just sort of raining right across the map. You could actually see where it had started raining, where it stopped raining. It's like a patch on the map, and it looked really cool. And it moves across the map too. And the same with sandstorms. You get sandstorms, and you can actually see a line on your mini-map, and it moves straight across like a big wave. And you can actually see it moving straight across, and then it leaves, sand everywhere, and it, dries everything up. And the same with droughts. The droughts actually dry up the lakes and the lake beds, and it's a really, really cool effect, and I'm really glad they added that in. Another thing that I wanted to bring up as well in this initial chapter was the survival guide. The survival guide is excellent. Basically, the encyclopedia with the entire game and how it works and what you're supposed to do and what requirements each thing has. It's probably one of the best survival guide encyclopedia in-game wikis that I've ever actually dealt with. You've got prompts in-game, like the tutorial guy will be talking to you, and he'll say you need to do this. So you'll click on this, and it'll open up the wiki. It'll open up the survival guide, and it's really intuitive, and I really, really, really like it. So going a little bit deeper in, why don't the settlers sleep? That was the first thing that I thought when night fell when I first started playing. And after I've been playing for a couple of hours, I realised that it's an awesome thing that they don't sleep, because it would slow the game down even more, because it takes long enough to construct buildings, waiting for the builders to construct buildings, and even more so waiting for the materials to construct those buildings. It is a nightmare. Like I said, that I'd been playing for 4.5 hours, and I honestly think I probably could have cut that down to 2.5, because I reckon 2 hours of that was probably me waiting for builders, waiting for materials, things like that. I realised, as I said right at the start, this was just me playing the tutorial, so I haven't done things like I haven't maxed out research trees and things like that, which I will do in the future. So I assume there's probably warehouses and stuff that you can unlock that will allow you to build things faster, or gather resources, materials and that faster, store them closer to your construction projects, things like that. That's the assumption I'm making anyway. So I'm hoping I'll be able to figure some of that stuff out as I continue playing. There are a couple of features that I feel like probably should have been removed from the tutorial. A couple of issues I stumbled across, such as settlers dying, getting sick, leaving, things like that. It was really distracting from the tutorial itself. Although in saying that, the survival guide does come back to save the day there, because it's so intuitive. I was able to have a look and sort of figure out how to work around all that, but I just thought that sort of thing should have either A, had its own tutorial, or B, just really shouldn't have been in there at all, because it took a lot away, especially in sort of, I was about, I don't know, 50 or 60 seasons in, and all of a sudden my settlers was dropping off the face of the planet. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? But, I was able to figure that out with the survival guide. Turns out that, if you have more variety of food, people are happier and healthier and things like that. But I don't think that's actually explained to you during the tutorial. Now, one of my favourite features is actually the sound effects on the buildings themselves. So when you zoom in, you get sound effects. And most of them are pretty generic, like you'll zoom in on a water tower and you'll get like sloshing water sounds. But my favourite one was actually the graveyard. So you zoom in on the graveyard and you can hear like creepy wind, and you can hear crows gawking and toads making whatever sounds toads make, and it's actually really, really cool. They've done a really good job on sound design. I'm actually quite impressed. So yeah, it's pretty much about this point during the tutorial that I realised that I was going to be here for a while. Like, it's a really well designed tutorial. Like, it teaches you, I think, pretty much everything you need to know to be able to go in and sort of start your own settlement, do your own thing, and survive. But it was definitely at this point that I realised that I was going to be here for a bloody long time, because I realised that there's a lot of features that I knew that the game must have had that we hadn't gotten to yet. And by this point, I'm about 2.5, 3 hours in. Again, if I wasn't waiting around for materials and things like that, I probably could have cut the total tutorial time down to about 2.5 hours, but it is what it is. And the autosave isn't really too intrusive either. The autosave is actually quite good. You can, it saves, you can move the camera around. It's got this cool feature where there's a countdown at the top of the screen, and it starts at 10 or something and counts its way down, and you can just decide, save then, or save now, or you can actually do it. So I guess it means that it's not going to be, you can decide when to autosave, so then the autosave doesn't interrupt whatever you're doing at that particular time. So going to the deepest point of this analysis, there are a few things that I want to mention. Nothing bad actually, it's all really well designed. The radiation is an interesting one. It took me a little while to wrap my head around, but I guess the radiation acts like a bit of a weather system. So, you can get specific concentrated spots of radiation on the ground, and if you're unlucky enough, that could centre itself sort of on top of your crops, like your farms or your water tower or a water collector or something like that. It doesn't actually cause that many issues, because you can do things like I said, there's a few features I like. You can set up your water collectors and that to put covers over them, and it'll put covers over the water collectors and the crops when it starts raining highly radiated rain, so that it saves your crops and your water from that. You can build decontamination buildings that, they've got assigned settlers that will go around and decontaminate buildings and things, especially your food production buildings. So the radiation's not that much of a problem. It is a bit of an inconvenience at the start, but by the end of the sort of tutorial, for probably the last 2 hours, I didn't find myself thinking too much about radiation. It just wasn't as much of a problem as I thought it was going to be. And that actually brings up the protective clothing as well. I spent the majority of that entire 4.5 hours. Now, I'm not sure whether the tutorial is made easier on purpose, or whether the game's just like this, because I haven't actually played any of the core game yet. I've only played the 4.5 hours of the tutorial. But pretty much for that entire 4.5 hours, I struggled to get any real protection clothing at all. It was always pretty much sitting at 0 on my materials panel, and it didn't really cause me any problems. Not that it was made obviously aware to me anyway. There are a few other things that it took me an embarrassing amount of time to sort of work out. One of these ones was the electronics resource. So part of the tutorial is you get told to build a research station. And then once that's built, you assign your research, just like any other building, and you build the building, then you assign settlers to it. And this one told me to build the research station, assign settlers to it, and then basically start making electronics, the resource electronics, which you would get through your refinery, just like you would with your metal or your cloth, your plastic, things like that. And the electronics, it took me ages to figure out that you actually have to go into your research station, and then it brings up a research tree, And then once you bring up that research tree, you can select, various things. And it took me ages to work that out, and it was so embarrassing because this isn't the first game that I've played that's had research trees. So I should have sort of worked that out for myself, but it took me ages. Another thing that took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure out was how the power grid works. Now, it's not a very complicated power grid system. Like, it's not like your Prison Architect or something like that. We actually have to lay down cables and things like that, and it's annoying and it's cluttery and all that sort of stuff. But it took me ages to figure that out as well. You've actually got to get the power poles within the sort of the line radius and all that sort of stuff. And then I figured out, I'd had a bit of a stupid moment. I realised that I was trying to figure out why I didn't have any power during the night when our only power source is solar power. So it took me ages to figure out as well, so that was quite embarrassing again. So I feel like the game needs a little bit more warnings, and it does have a notification tab, but I got to, I think it was season 75, and I realised I didn't have any water. Like, I had about 5,000 food and had like 200 water, and I'm like, whoa, how did I get to this? I realised it was because of my various irrigation plans I had for my farms and that, but I sort of figured that out for myself. So I turned all them off and assigned a few more water collectors, and it was fine. But I didn't get any real warning until I saw it for myself, and like the material number is right up the top there, but because of everything else that's going on, I didn't really look at it. And I was sort of half expecting that, when it got to a certain amount, it would tell me, hey, you're running out of water, you're probably all going to die. But it didn't, and I ended up, and the only reason I figured that out was because the game gave me a notification saying that there was a drought on the way in like the next 5 or 6 seasons or whatever it was. And then I was like, oh, I'm sure I'm alright for that. Looked at my resources and I had 5,000 food and like 200 water. So I freaked out a little bit and started building, water collectors and water towers, and I ended up basically pulling all of my settlers out of manufacturing and putting them into water collection just to build up, and I basically managed to just pull through. So, there was that, but I sort of felt like there should have been some sort of warning system. But moving on, the decrees. Now, you build what that game calls a forum, and that's where settlers can come. They give you things to do, they can make requests of you and things like that. Basically missions. They're pretty much just in-game missions. But you can also put your own decrees in. So you can be like, I now decree this, I now decree that, and you can have, I think, 2. And they're great and they're funny. I mean, you can do things like banish the elderly because, no one likes old people. or you can basically tell everyone they're not allowed to have kids. So you've got like birth control and things, because kids are horrible creatures anyway, so I don't know why you'd want any. So you can do things like that. You can just tell them, no more kids, or no, all you elderly can piss off. We don't want you here anymore. This is going to be, teens to middle-aged only, and everyone else can piss off. The other thing, the last one on this list, is the raider system. So it's not bad. I'm not sure if I missed out on anything with it being the tutorial, but I felt like it could be a little bit better if all you get to experience with the raiders is pretty much what you experience in the tutorial, which is pretty much along the lines of, hey, give us money. No, well, we're going to attack you then. And they're not particularly difficult. There were about 10 raiders and I managed to smash them all with one watchtower, and I didn't even take any damage. So I'm assuming they're probably going to be a bit harder or a bit more impressive in the main game. But I mean, it wasn't bad, but I just think if that's all it is, it probably could be better. So all in all, I really, really enjoyed myself with this game. I thought it was great. I think it was fairly obvious that the developers put a lot of effort into it and a lot of time, and I can appreciate that because the game, it looks good. There's a lot of attention to detail. The expedition system, it's quite cool. It took me a while to understand how it all actually works because the tutorial kind of skims over it, and as I said earlier on, the tutorial does that. It will go really, really, really deep into one thing and then just sort of skim over others. And I'm not sure if that's done on purpose or not. Not too much of a problem because most of it's easy enough to work out once you understand how the game works. And once I understood how the game works, things like how does the power grid work? How do I get electronics as a material and things? Once you understand that, the rest of the game pretty much falls into place. And that's how I felt about Expeditions, even though I felt like they might have skimmed over it a little bit. But I mean, it's quite good. Like, you get to sort of make it's like a little mini game thing where you make decisions and stuff like that, and you can, get resources from scouting out you know, old abandoned houses and petrol stations and supermarkets and stuff. It's all quite well done, and it does add. Well, basically, I just found it gives you something to do while you're waiting for materials or you're waiting for the builders to do their thing. But no, that's pretty much all I've got. Just a few points I wanted to bring up. Definitely the longest tutorial I've ever played. Like, this tutorial took me longer than my entire playtime for some games. You know, like, far out. So, I do wonder though, like, are there any other people aside from raiders? Like, is there any kind of diplomacy system, or is it planned, or, you know, any other groups or anything? Because I think that'd be quite cool. Would be interesting to know. I'm definitely going to keep playing it. I will be streaming this too, right here on YouTube. So if you do want to come and hang out, feel free. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons so that you can know when I'm going live. And you can come hang out. We can talk. Be good fun. So no, all in all, I'm looking forward to diving back in, especially streaming. So yeah, it was a good game. I mean, it kept me playing for 4.5 hours. The tutorial kept me playing for 4.5 hours. So there must have been something there.